Welcome everybody here, Brady from BGWX, and today we're breaking down potential polar vortex disruption that's about to take place here, and that will be affecting the U.S. Pretty significantly, and how that might affect potentially the weather for the eastern U.S. over the next couple of weeks. Potentially another cold spell on the way right before Christmas that could potentially bring a storm threat or multiple as we approach the holiday season here. Um, so without further ado, let's get going here. I have no idea how long this video is going to take, but it might be shorter, it might be longer. We'll find out. So come follow along with me here. If you're new, consider subscribing and liking the content if you enjoy the analysis. Let's get cooking here. So here I thought I'd start off here. Here's a cool little visual of the polar vortex here, right? A 3D animation, give you a little insight, right? Over the north, right up here, right? You can see the land all around with a 3D visual of, kind of the polar vortex. You can, play it out a little bit and see, how it kind of moves. If I can click here. Oh, right, just watch it and, they're based on the GFS forecast, kind of it circulate and you you know, see a little bit of a movement there, right, with the polar vortex, right, to put it simply, just to show that, again, we're not looking at potentially a major polar vortex disruption, but that doesn't mean the effects, aren't going to be felt with this. So, we're looking at what's called a sudden stratospheric warming event, SSW for short. And when we're looking at that, we're looking at the stratospheric polar vortex, right, which is up here in the atmosphere, right? Higher up in the atmosphere, and higher latitude as well. We look at towards the North Pole, right? Where Santa lives. That is exactly where we look at the stratospheric polar vortex, and we're looking at a potential warming event, meaning temperatures rising in the polar vortex here. You can take a look here, the same website, Stratoserb. Um, Very good website here to look at the polar vortex, and you can notice what we look at when we have a sudden stratospheric warming event. We can keep calling it just an SSW from now on, to save me the time and you the time. But you can see here, right? Notice the temperature, right, will really start to increase. Um, it's a little bit more steadily over the next week or so. But notice that increase in temperature in the polar vortex here, the stratospheric polar vortex, and also notice a decrease in the winds, right? We see a reversal and a decrease in the winds here that is happening right now, and it does. You can see the winds do strengthen again after this, but that's not before, right? We did have these winds decrease, and we're going to see, um, there's potentially strength. We're going to see uh, the temperature strengthen here in the stratospheric vortex, and eventually, maybe down the line, we look at another one, which we'll look at on ensembles, which we'll take a look at. So, which could lead into January to make things pretty interesting there. So that will be something to keep an eye on as well, which will go in further detail. And for those curious, I do live streams quite often and during the nighttime. So if you are curious, you can find my stuff, a lot of more in-depth content there. I break down all the big storms, baby, all the big storms happening in the eastern U.S. So come take a look. We do hurricane coverage as well if you're interested in that, which is not the season, but most of you are likely winter folks. So come enjoy. If you like the big storms, man, I'm going to be breaking those down this winter. So come on in, filter in. Um, Here's a look, right? We were looking at that 10 millibar temperature here. Notice here's the GFS ensemble. And notice, right, here's the stratosphere we're looking at currently, right? The level of the atmosphere we're at, we're looking at the stratosphere. And here's, right, looking towards the North Pole, right? We're looking, in general, and just mainly the northern part of of the northern hemisphere here. This is kind of where we're looking at right now. And notice, right, this warming here happening in the stratosphere sphere, right? Again, it's SSW is a minor. Allow what this allows to happen is it allows the polar vortex to become a little bit more unstable, right? If we go back um, to our 3D animation, which I think is so cool. You see here it comes a little bit just a little bit wobbly here, and that's even towards the end, so that would be something to keep an eye on as well later. But just a little bit, a minor, right? Little bit of a minor. Um, a change in our polar vortex and our structure. It's harder to notice on the 3D animation, but we can notice the warming happening here on, and you can see then that's the other one that models are highlighting down the line, which we can talk about just a little bit. But the main focus on what's going on right now is right this increase in temperature here, and it allows for a little bit of a displacement of the polar vortex, and we'll likely see a stretching event that then happens. You can take a look here, right? Again, just looking at cold air at this point now, from right, and then you can see it. Look at the cold air eventually down the line. It gets displaced a little bit further south. You can see this cold air filter in now over the eastern U.S., and this allows, um, this could set the stage for a potential storm opportunity, down the line. So, what temperatures again in the meantime, right? In the meantime, right, we're going to be a little bit warmer for the most part um, over the next. Oh, we can slide back here, play it back. That was the GFS there. That's the Euro AI, and here's the Euro here, and we can see, right, over the next week or so, likely going to be warmer here, looking at 500 millibar height anomaly here, basically 500 millibars in the atmosphere, right? We're looking at the stratosphere before, right? We're looking at, closer to the top of our atmosphere. Now we're looking at 500 millibars, right? So imagine if I draw a vertical column. I love doing this. I think this is, this best demonstrates, how it works. If I draw a vertical column here, the atmosphere, and imagine this is, towards the top of our atmosphere here. Oh, it's not a straight line. Oh boy, it's fine. And imagine now, still in the upper levels of our atmosphere, but now imagine I draw it at 500 millibars here. This is where we're looking at currently, and then we're here down at the surface by 1,000 millibars, and in between that, you have 850, 700, etc. 250 up here, right? You go up to the top of the atmosphere, and I think that vertical column always, I think, really helps link the disconnect that often people have when looking at some of these weather charts. I think it's really good to highlight, what goes on there, and notice, right, where these warmer height anomalies over in our 540 line really displaced to the north. Really, again, keeping that cold air in our polar vortex intact. But then what we're going to notice here, right? What we've been noticing is we're in a reload pattern is what we've been in for the past, um, you know, for the past couple weeks now. That beginning of December and late November, we noticed, right? We got into a colder stretch there to start off that first week. Now we're in a bit of a transient warm pattern, meaning we're shifting back and forth from being warmer, colder, and we're going to allow an opportunity here, for these where we've seen some real small polar vortex stretches, right? Notice this is what's going on right now. A lot of you are currently feeling the cold right now. This is a little lobe from the polar vortex, just a little stretching event we're seeing in behind the big storm we just had for the eastern seaboard, producing the lake effect snow here. And that's, again, that gradient is allowing that temperature gradient from the warmer lake temperatures and these colder upper air temperatures sinking down to the surface are allowing for that lake effect snow to go on currently. And that's the same cold air you're feeling right now. So just kind of show example, look, that's what, cold air looks like in behind here at 500 millibars in the atmosphere. And again, we get warmer. We're still mixing out some of that warmer air that we saw from the Pacific, here over the last week or so, and that's again, played a part in why we were so warm. Part of that storm yesterday, we influx, right, increase in ridging here, we pulled in all this warm air here, from the tropics, and that's why a lot of people got into 50s and 60s along the East Coast yesterday. And so we play this out continuously here, and notice now, look for that, right? Look for that ridging to form there, right? You see that ridging go all the way up here into the higher latitudes, right? a big old ridge to potentially form, and then we're looking at this cold air kind of gets displaced potentially into right a lobe of the polar vortex here, gets shot down. Right, one of our bigger stretching events would be our biggest stretching event of the season so far, and could potentially allow for a little bit of an Arctic outbreak to occur. And then notice that ridge forms, and we have our easterly ridge here, right? Even though we're in a positive NAO here in this situation, right? You still, you know, and your western ridge gets really more expansive on this specific model run. But the general idea of models is that we're going to be seeing a big westerly ridge form, right? Your big westerly ridge form, and you're also going to have an easterly ridge as well take place. And models are still deciphering, you know, how exactly this is going to play out. Again, we're pretty far out here. We're still 8, 9 days advanced, but there's one kind of one specific time frame here where models are kind of honing in on, and it's this. You know, this the weekend before Christmas potentially look at for maybe something to keep an eye on where the timing of our cold air displacement here from the polar vortex, right? The timing of when our cold air arrives from the polar vortex, to put it simpler, along with a potential storm track that comes, you know, off this westerly ridge here, you know, these two pieces could potentially interact, and we could be looking at a storm threat down the line. Again, there's a lot of specifics that require, you know, still a potential storm to happen. But it should be noted there has been some decent consistency in some of these models, and seems like we're starting to get somewhere maybe, and there's some agreement in models suggesting that this time frame might be able to produce something. Here's a look here, same thing, 500 millibars, just looking at vorticity. The amount, in other words, the amount of spin we're looking at 500 millibars in the atmosphere. How strong is that spin? So this is a little bit of a lower resolution, but this is the Euro AI model, and it's also one of our best performing models so far. It's a new model, recent model, but it has been doing quite well, and you can notice the consistency over these runs here. And look how for how far out we are. These is very impressive. The consistency of showing a big trough well placed with a westerly ridge and an easterly ridge over the eastern seaboard, and potentially allowing just a real good placement where a trough drops in between, and you look at potentially now right, big trough forms, and then you look at a potential storm track off the coast, giving an opportunity for something for places that aren't in the interior along the eastern seaboard. Now, there's still a lot of question marks. We don't even know if a storm is coming, to be honest, yet. But it's good, you know, to kind of, you know, start following things so far out, even if they don't end up happening, because it gives you, you know, of an idea of model performance for the future. And just, you know, again, I feel like you can develop a relationship almost, you know, with these storms kind of where you can get a feel as you get closer, as you start, you know, getting closer to these events, you have an idea of where models were and how you've progressed and how the setup has changed. And so that's why I don't mind getting so far out following some of this stuff. But again, it's all contextual and circumstantial because a lot of specifics need to happen for an all-out snowstorm to happen. You may have seen some model runs lately that have shown, you know, big hits, you know, over the eastern U.S., in particular, closer to I-95. But again, they're still change. There, it's not locked in because if I play it out here, here's a look also at our GraphCast model, you know, which again, along with the Euro AI, right, our two AI models are the happen to be the best two performing so far this winter by statistically. So that's, you know, pretty interesting to follow here. And notice the same thing, right, as our Euro AI showing a big old westerly ridge forming here in this 8, 9 day time frame, in that cold air again getting displaced, right, from our SSW cold air getting displaced. Now we have access to cold air potentially here in the eastern US, along with a storm track that's coming over this ridge. And we see this trough develop here, and all of a sudden we start increasing the amplitude, meaning getting more vertical with our trough sinking in and strengthening, and that allows for a potential storm track again to watch along the eastern US during this time frame to keep an eye on. Again, here's what can change though, right? We have moving pieces here. The strength and location of this ridge will be critical, right? If this is too far east, then we suppress the storm track too much further offshore. If it's too far west, then this can allow this storm to come up further. But at the same time, it also depends on where your eastern ridge is too, because the eastern ridge, if too far west, can kind of work to offset whatever happens here and allow this storm to come up. Or if you press the ridge too much, to squeeze the storm, and you're not going to be able to get as strong of a system. Or if you move this eastern ridge too far east, then it allows the storm to potentially work offshore and develop too late. And again, there's in between potentially. There's a bunch of in between that could happen there. And this doesn't even bring up the fact exactly how our polar vortex, stretch occurs, right? This stretching event, could play a pretty critical role. How far is this cold air able to make it? How strong of a stretching event do we actually see happen? It's hard to say until it actually happens what can potentially take place, but it seems to be some decent agreement of the general idea that we're going to see a polar vortex stretch take place. A big old western ridge is going to form, and whenever you have a big western ridge over the western part of the US, it gives you an opportunity oftentimes for an east coast storm track. And then we're going to see an easterly ridge form, and we'll see, does this ridge extend farther west, and we get some more high latitude blocking, potentially some more high pressure to kind of lock in the storm, and make prevent it, making it harder for the storm to cut. But even if that doesn't happen, it's not guaranteed that we see an interior solution, even if you don't have high latitude blocking. A lot of people talk about specifics needing a 50-50 low setup, where you have two low pressure systems, um, located roughly around there. That's an example of a 50-50 low setup, or a negative NAO, which is just your North Atlantic oscillation, and you have high pressure over Greenland, and then teleconnections specific PNA. We will have a positive PNA, as you can see here, but there's it's all circumstantial, and there's different ways to get a snowstorm, for your in the eastern US. It's not all one way. It has to be. So there's a lot of context always in each individual setup that happens. That can give an opportunity for something different to happen. And every situation is different. You got to put that in the context. Even though you can look at the same rules to try to apply it to what's going, it doesn't always apply perfectly. So that, I hope that this kind of provides some context and clarity on what's what's happening here with this ongoing storm system. And then after that, we keep an eye on, again, do we see another warming event take place? You can see winds decreasing here on some of these models, or at least flattening out on some and decreasing here on a few of our models. And then notice the temperature increase again on some of our models as well here. Um, just giving context that this could set up potentially a wintry January pattern. Down the line, models starting to hint potentially at that now. Just like they sniffed out this, models are potentially looking at potentially another warming event to potentially take place later this month. And that'd be something to keep an eye on, and could really make January a real interesting month weather-wise. You got to remember too, it's like you're stacking the deck more. I talked about it on my stream last night. You have the pieces available. Um, let's say, as you start to approach, winter time, as you get more and more, then that in your sun angle starts to decrease, and you get more into January. It's like you have a good starting lineup now, right, to work with. right? The odds are kind of working more in your favor. You don't need as many pieces to come into place from an atmospheric standpoint. Like you don't need the perfect high pressure placement. You don't need everything to be perfect in the atmosphere to get what you want. But if you do see these things develop, now it's like not only do you have a good starting lineup, but you have a good bench now too. You have a complete, right? You have your super team, so to say. All right, I like to use my Celtics as an example of that. Sorry, if you're not a Celtics fan, I'm a big one, proudly. But it's an example, right? And then you have those things, and now you're like, oh, this could be a really good winter pattern potentially. So that's kind of how I view it. You don't need every piece to come into, to fit perfectly in order to get a snowstorm. But if they do come together, it can definitely enhance your odds, right? Basically, increasing margin for error. Nothing is guaranteed, even in good potential setups you look at down the line. They're never guaranteed. So it's why you always have to be looking, with all the different possible scenarios that can take place. It's never guaranteed exactly that you're going to get a snowstorm, especially here in this time frame. But models are starting to suggest, that we could be looking at a potential storm during this time frame. I would say the 20th to 24th. There could be one or two opportunities to take a look at, depending on how strong. Again, there's going to be potentially a storm system that comes through next uh next Thursday, Friday to keep an eye on about a week from now. Details TBD on that. Still definitely some unclarity, especially depending on how our polar vortex situation plays out. Depending on how strong or weak that storm is, that will define how our trough comes in behind it. And this is, the time frame a lot of people are starting to look in on, including myself, for maybe an East Coast storm track to get a potential snowstorm. So what's up? We're going to keep an eye on here. Potential. We have our polar vortex disruption that's going to take place, and how this plays out. Will play a big part in what happens here just before Christmas. So again, exact impacts TBD, but do expect something. We are looking at another potential cool down here. For a lot of people potentially, we can look at those temperatures right here. We can look at surface temperature, 2 meter, Fahrenheit, and you can see in this time frame, right, we get those cold temperatures that come on in. Look at the cool down we do here right before Christmas. A lot of even below zero temperatures you can see there in New England, single digits potentially work their way in. So maybe, right, coldest air of the season working its way in right now. And maybe an even colder stretch of weather to take a look at just before Christmas potentially. And beyond that, it's a little hard to say how much we can hold that colder weather in. But, again, things are looking interesting here for winter weather folks that really, have an appreciation and look forward to some of this stuff. This is a time frame I'd keep an eye on here. And I thought, I'd give a little context, what is a polar vortex disruption, how it impacts us, how this upcoming polar vortex disruption is going to play out potentially, the different scenarios that can happen. Leave a like if you enjoy the content and consider subscribing if you would like to see more content just like this for the course of the winter. I'm going to be covering it all, so come on in and have a happy holidays.